Tell me something. When was the last time you were truly, completely happy? Not relieved, not satisfied, but happy. And can you honestly say it had anything to do with what you owned, what you'd achieved, or where you stood on somebody else's ladder? I want you to sit with that question for a moment, because most men and women alive today are quietly betting their entire lives on a promise that has never once been kept. They are telling themselves, without even realizing they're saying it, when I get there, when I make the money, win the title, buy the house, then I will finally be happy. And they will spend 40 years chasing that horizon, only to arrive and discover, to their quiet horror, that the horizon moved. Why does this happen to nearly everyone? And more importantly, how do you make sure it doesn't happen to you? Stay with me, because the answer is closer and simpler than you think. Let me tell you about a man named Frank. Frank is not unusual. In fact, Frank is remarkable only in how unremarkable he is, which is precisely why his story matters. Frank rises at 6:15 every morning, the same 15 minutes past 6 it has been for 11 years. He showers, he dresses, he eats the same breakfast standing at the counter, because sitting down feels like it wastes time he doesn't have a name for. He drives the same road to the same building, nods to the same faces, and sits down at a desk that has slowly, over the years, come to feel less like a place he works and more like a place he waits. Frank is not lazy. Understand that clearly. Frank works hard, harder than most. He stays late when he's asked to. He tells himself and tells his wife that things will ease up once he gets the promotion, once the kids are through school, once the mortgage is paid down. But if you asked Frank to tell you, specifically, what he is working toward, not vaguely, not in feelings, but in words, on paper, he could not do it. He has never written it down. He has never once sat with a pen and said, this, exactly this, is where my life is going. He simply gets up and works and waits, the way a man waits at a bus stop, with no idea which bus he's meant to board, trusting that eventually one of them will feel right. And so the years pass, not in dramatic failures, not in tragedy, but in the quiet, unremarkable accumulation of Tuesdays, until one evening Frank looks up from his desk, 40 years old, and realizes with a cold and sudden clarity that he has been waiting his whole life for a permission slip that was never coming, because no one was ever going to hand him one. He was supposed to write it himself. Now, history does not remember the Franks of the world, but it remembers, in vivid detail, the handful of men who refused to be one. Consider Henry Ford. Before the world knew his name, he was a man who had failed, not once, but twice, in business ventures that left him broke, and by every outward measure, finished. But somewhere in that failure, Ford did something the crowd around him did not do. He did not wait to feel ready. He fixed his mind, with total clarity, on a single fixed idea, a car the ordinary man could afford, and he refused to release his grip on it, failure after failure, until the idea became the Model T and reshaped the modern world. Consider Thomas Edison, who was told as a boy that his mind was too addled for schooling, and who later, standing before the ashes of a laboratory that fire had just destroyed, is said to have looked at the wreckage and remarked that there was great value in disaster, because now they could begin again with a clean slate. He did not wait for the ache of loss to pass before deciding what came next. He decided in the smoke. And consider Andrew Carnegie, a boy who started in a cotton mill for a few cents a day, who did not wait for wealth to arrive, and then decide what kind of man he'd be. He decided, early and on paper, exactly the kind of life he intended to build. And then, day by unspectacular day, he built it. What did these men share? Not luck. Not ahead. Each of them, at some early and often desperate hour, made a decision, specific, written, or as good as written, burned into the mind about exactly where they were headed. They did not wait to arrive at happiness. They decided in advance on a destination and let the working toward it become the happiness itself. And here, my friend, is the secret. and it is so simple that most people walk straight past it every day of their lives without ever seeing it. A farmer does not wait for a harvest to feel like planting. He does not stand at the edge of bare brown soil and say, "I will believe in this field once it is green." No, he plants in faith, tends in faith, and the joy of farming is not a reward waiting at the far end of the season. It is present in every single morning he walks that land with purpose, because he knows exactly what he is growing and why. Your mind works precisely the same way. It is fertile soil, and it does not care whether you plant a clear goal or plant nothing at all. It will simply grow whatever you give it. And if you give it nothing, it will grow the weeds of drift and worry and waiting, the very weeds that were choking poor Frank without his ever noticing they'd taken root. This is the whole of the secret. Happiness was never a prize sitting at the finish line of success. Happiness is what happens the moment you know, with total clarity, what you are working toward. And Frank, understand this, already had everything he needed to change his life. He did not need more talent, more luck, or more time. He needed one single decision, made and written down, about where his life was actually headed. So here's what I ask of you today before this day ends. Take a pen, take a piece of paper, and write in one clear and honest sentence exactly what you are working toward. Not someday, today. That single sentence, written in your own hand, is the seed. Everything else is simply tending the field. There is a thought that visits nearly every man and woman alive, usually late at night, usually uninvited, and it goes something like this: what if I do everything right, and still, at the end of it, I feel nothing at all? What if I climb the whole way up, only to stand at the top and discover the view is exactly as empty as the ground I started from? It is an unsettling thought, the kind most people push away as quickly as it arrives, because it touches something they would rather not examine too closely, the quiet suspicion that the entire arrangement they've built their life around might be built on sand. And so, rather than face it, they simply keep moving. They tell themselves that the feeling they're missing is only a few steps further along. The next raise will do it. The next title will do it. Surely, they think, once I have what I'm reaching for, this hollow feeling trailing behind me will finally fall away. Year after year, they carry this same private arrangement with themselves, always postponing the reckoning, always certain the answer sits just beyond the next bend in the road. But let me tell you plainly what decades of watching human beings has taught men far wiser than myself. That bend in the road never arrives at a place. It simply reveals another bend. The raise comes, and within a season, it feels like the salary you always had. The title arrives, and within a season, it feels like nothing more than a heavier set of keys. This is not because you aimed at the wrong things. It is because you were taught, without anyone meaning any harm by it, to treat contentment as a location, when it was never a location to begin with. Now here is where the whole matter turns, and turns simply. The horizon was never going to hold still for you, because a horizon, by its very nature, moves with the one walking toward it. That is not a flaw in the plan. That is the plan revealing itself for what it always was, which means the striving itself, the early mornings, the hard decisions, the steady work, was never merely the toll you paid to reach the good part later. It was the good part, all along, quietly waiting for you to notice it. Once a person truly understands this, something in his chest loosens that he did not even know had been tightened. He stops running a race with no finish line and starts, instead, walking a road he has decided is worth walking on its own account. And on that road, something remarkable happens. The very thing he had been chasing for years arrives quietly, almost without ceremony, because he has finally stopped demanding that it announce itself before he would allow himself to feel it. You do not need to wait for the horizon to hold still. You only need to stop asking it to. There is a quiet dread that settles over certain people, usually somewhere in the middle of their lives, and it rarely arrives with any drama at all. It simply creeps in on an ordinary Tuesday, while they are doing something entirely unremarkable, driving a familiar road perhaps, or sitting at a familiar desk, when suddenly they are struck by a question they cannot quite shake. Where, exactly, is all of this going? Not vaguely, specifically. And when they search themselves for an answer, they find only a kind of fog where a destination ought to be, and that discovery unsettles them more than almost anything else could, because it suggests they have been in motion for years without actually going anywhere at all. So, being reasonable people, they do what reasonable people do. They keep moving anyway. They tell themselves the direction will become clear eventually, that clarity is simply a matter of getting a little further down the road, a little more experience under their belt, a little more time to figure it out. And so the years accumulate, one steady, sensible decision after another, each one perfectly defensible on its own, and yet somehow, taken together, adding up to no particular place whatsoever. Now let me explain to you exactly what is happening here, because once you see it, you will never mistake it again. A ship in open water, moving briskly, adjusting cleverly to every shift of the wind, can look from a distance exactly like a ship on a voyage. But motion and direction are not the same thing, and the difference between them is not always visible from the outside. It is only visible to the captain himself in the quiet hours, when he asks himself honestly which port he is actually sailing toward, and finds, to his own surprise, that he never named one. He has simply been responding to whatever wind happened to blow and calling that navigation. This is the condition of a great many capable, hard-working people, and here is the remarkable thing about it. The moment a port is finally named, nothing about the water changes, but everything about the voyage does. Every choice suddenly has a reason behind it. Every course correction suddenly means something, because it is measured against something. The fog that once sat over the whole enterprise simply lifts, not because circumstances improved, but because a destination was finally spoken aloud or written down, and a ship with a named port stops drifting the very moment it is named, even before it has traveled another single mile. You do not need new winds. You do not need a different sea. You need only stop long enough to name where you are actually headed, and the strange, low weight you have been carrying without a name for it will begin, quietly, to lift on its own. There is a particular kind of ache that settles into a person who has convinced himself that satisfaction is something owed to him only after the work is finished. You know the feeling, even if you have never named it. It shows up as a low, persistent tightness that follows a man through his ordinary days, through the meetings, the deadlines, the long drive home. A sense that none of this quite counts yet, that the real living is somewhere further along, waiting on the far side of some future success he has not yet reached. And so he moves through the present as though it were merely a waiting room, and waiting rooms, as anyone who has sat in one can tell you, are not places where a person allows himself to feel very much at all. He tells himself this is simply the price of ambition, that the tightness will ease once the deal closes, once the debt clears, once the promotion finally lands on his desk. And so he postpones his own permission to feel settled, year after year, always certain the feeling is stationed just past the next milestone, waiting for him to arrive and claim it. But let me walk you through something a farmer understands in his hands, long before he ever puts words to it. No man who has ever worked the land stood at the edge of bare, brown soil in early spring and refused to plant until the field first looked like a harvest. That would strike any farmer as backward, almost foolish. He plants in faith. He tends in faith. And what you will notice, if you watch a farmer closely through a full season, is that his contentment does not arrive in September along with the crop. It is present in April, in the particular satisfaction of walking a field he knows is going somewhere, tended by a man who already believes in it. Here is the turn, and it is a simple one, though it changes everything once it is truly seen. Your mind behaves precisely like that field. It does not wait for a harvest before it begins producing a feeling. It produces continuously whatever is being tended within it. And if what is being tended is a genuine sense of direction, a mind will yield a quiet, steady contentment long before any outward success has arrived to justify it. The feeling was never rationed out at the finish line. It was always available at the planting to anyone willing to plant with conviction instead of waiting for proof. So plant today, not tomorrow, once conditions improve. Plant the sentence, the goal, the clear direction, right into the soil of an ordinary Tuesday, and tend it the way a good farmer tends ground he has already decided to believe in. The tightness in your chest that has been waiting for a harvest to release it will begin, quite naturally, to loosen the moment you stop waiting for the crop and start trusting the planting. There is a quiet suspicion that visits certain honest people from time to time, and it is this: what if all my good intentions amount in the end to nothing more than good intentions? What if I carry this vague, sincere hope for a better life for years and years, and arrive at the far side of it having built nothing at all, simply because the hope was never sharp enough to cut a path through the days? It is an uncomfortable thought to sit with, because it suggests that sincerity alone, however genuine, may not be enough to save a man from drifting. And so, rather than face that discomfort directly, most people do something understandable. They keep the hope general. They tell themselves that someday, when the timing feels right, they will sit down and sort out exactly what they want, exactly where they're headed, exactly what they intend to build. Until that day arrives, they reason, surely a warm, well-meaning wish is enough to be going on with, and they carry that fog of good intention for years, mistaking its warmth for progress. Now let me explain to you plainly what a fog like that can and cannot do. A fog cannot guide a ship. It can surround the ship, it can even feel, in a strange way, comforting in its softness, but it has never once in the history of sailing shown a captain where the rocks are. What guides a ship is a fixed point, a bearing, a coordinate, something specific enough to be wrong about, and therefore specific enough to be corrected toward. This is precisely what separates a wish from a written goal. A wish asks nothing of you. A sentence, set down honestly on paper, specific enough that a stranger reading it would know exactly what you intend, and by when, asks everything of you, and in exchange, it gives you something a wish never could, a fixed point to walk toward, day after ordinary day. This is not a mystical process. It requires no special gift. A boy working long hours for a few cents a day can write such a sentence just as easily as a man with every advantage, and history has shown, again and again, that the boy who writes it tends to outpace the man who merely hopes. The sentence does the quiet work of forcing precision onto a life that would otherwise wander pleasantly and go nowhere in particular. And here is where the whole weight of the matter lifts. The moment that sentence exists, really exists, in your own hand, not merely turning over in your thoughts, you are no longer the man adrift in good intentions. You are the man with a bearing. Every choice from that point forward has something to be measured against, and a strange calm settles over a person once he finally has that. You do not need 1,000 goals. You need one true sentence written before this day is finished, and the fog you have been calling ambition will finally begin to clear. There is a private doubt that many capable people carry with them for years, and they rarely say it out loud, because saying it out loud would mean admitting how much it troubles them. The doubt goes something like this: what if I am simply not the kind of person who builds a remarkable life? What if the men and women who achieve extraordinary things were given something at the start that I was not? some spark or capacity I happen to be missing, and no matter how long I wait or how hard I try, that missing piece will never arrive. It is a heavy thing to believe, even quietly, and so most people who believe it do not examine it too closely. Instead, they wait. They wait to feel more capable before they commit themselves fully to anything. They wait to feel ready, certain that readiness is a condition that will eventually be granted to them, the way weather eventually clears, if they are simply patient enough. And so the months pass, and the years follow the months, and the waiting itself begins to feel, to them, like a kind of quiet, respectable effort, when in truth it is nothing more than standing still with excellent posture. Now, let me tell you something I have come to believe after watching a great many lives unfold, both the ones that flourished and the ones that merely endured. The man who eventually builds something remarkable is, in nearly every case, not a fundamentally different man from the one who spends his life only wishing for it. Same hands, same mind, same number of hours given to him each morning. The difference between them was never a hidden ingredient handed out unevenly at birth. The difference was a decision, made and kept, about where those hands and that mind would be pointed. This should come as tremendously good news, though it is often heard, at first, with a flicker of unease, because it removes the comfortable excuse that the missing piece is simply out there somewhere, waiting to be discovered. It was never out there. It was always in here, sitting unused. The way water poured freely across open ground simply spreads thin and disappears into the earth, accomplishing nothing in particular, while that same water, gathered and aimed, can turn a wheel. So here is where the weight finally comes off your shoulders. You are not waiting to become capable enough for the life you want. You already possess, today, in this very hour, every raw quality a builder of remarkable things has ever possessed. Patience enough, strength enough, mind enough. What you have been calling a lack of readiness was never a lack at all. It was simply a lack of aim. Point yourself somewhere today, deliberately and on purpose, and you will discover, often within days, that the capable person you were waiting to become was standing in your shoes the entire time. There is a quiet unease that trails certain people through their ordinary evenings, the kind that surfaces just before sleep, when the day's noise has finally settled and a person is left alone with his own thoughts. It sounds something like this. I keep telling myself I will get serious about the life I actually want, and yet, somehow, year after year, that seriousness never quite begins. And beneath that thought sits a colder one still, one most people hurry past before they can look at it directly. What if I am the kind of person who only ever intends and never actually starts? Rather than face that thought head on, most people reach instead for a single comfortable word, and they lean on it more heavily than they realize. Someday. Someday, once things settle down. Someday, once the timing is better, once the schedule clears, once life feels a little less demanding than it does right now. It is a word that asks nothing of a person in the present moment, and that is exactly what makes it so easy to keep reaching for. Again and again, for years at a stretch, all while feeling, privately, like a person of real ambition, simply because the intention is sincere. Now let me walk you through what someday actually is, because once you see it clearly, you will never lean on it quite so comfortably again. Someday is not a date on any calendar. It has never once arrived on its own in the entire history of human striving, because it was never built to arrive. It was built to be postponed, endlessly, by its very design, the way a horizon is built to recede from anyone walking toward it. A man can spend 40 years faithfully waiting for someday, and arrive at the end of those 40 years no closer to it than the day he began, simply because he mistook a comfortable disguise for an actual plan. Here is the turn, and it is simpler than most people expect. Readiness was never a condition that arrives on its own, like fair weather rolling in after a storm. Readiness is manufactured, on the spot, by the very act of beginning. The mind, oddly enough, tends to catch up to the body once the body has already started moving, which means the seriousness a person has been waiting years to feel is often only a single small action away, not a distant season away. So here is what I would ask of you before this day closes. Do not wait for someday to hand you permission, because someday keeps no such appointments. Take the sentence you have already written, the direction you have already named, and give it one small, real action today, before the ordinary noise of tomorrow has a chance to talk you out of it. The uneasy thought that used to visit you at the edge of sleep will find, quite simply, that it no longer has anything left to say. Happiness was never waiting for you up ahead. At the end of some long and uncertain road, it was waiting for you to plant it, right where you stand, the moment you finally decided where you were going. This is your day to plant it. This has been your reminder that the life you want is not something you find. It is something you plant. Until next time, go plant it.